Good evening, everyone. Okay, it is 7 p.m., so we will call this regular meeting of the Planning Commission on February 22nd, 2021 to order. First on our agenda this evening is public remarks. There are two ways for the public to join our conversation this evening, and there will be three opportunities for public remarks. Right now, at the end of the meeting, and item 6A on our agenda, the public hearing. If you do want to speak during public remarks, you can use the raise hand feature in Zoom, or you can give us a phone call at 517-349-1232. For those who join us for public remarks, please limit your comments to 3 minutes. And please provide your name and address for the record at the top of your comments. With that said, we will open the floor for public remarks. Stephen,
there's only one person in your attendee area, sir, and the hand is not raised. We're hearing no telephone calls come in at this time.
Okay, very good. Then we will close public remarks and move on to agenda item number 3, which is approval of the agenda. Happy to entertain a motion. Moved by Commissioner Cordell. Do we have a second? Seconded by Commissioner McConnell. Any changes or amendments to the agenda?
I don't see any need.
Okay, very good. Any other discussion? All those in favor of the agenda say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? And the agenda passes. We'll then move on to agenda item 4A, which is approval of the minutes. We do have one set of minutes from our February 8th, 2021 regular meeting. Do we have a motion for the minute?
I move while the chair is frozen, I move approval of the minutes as circulated.
I see Mr. Bloomer has seconded that, so is there any discussion? Mr. Bloomer.
The last entry on the minutes was a comment that I made about something strange happening when I tried to download a copy of the township ordinance. I'd like to either amend or retract that because it turns out I accidentally fell into some kind of commercial thing. When I went back and did it again, I had no problems at all.
What would be your
friendly amendment?
So the amendment would be to remove my comment at the end about having trouble downloading the township ordinance.
Okay. With that amendment, all those in favor of approving the minutes signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay.
Can you all hear me again? I think I'm back.
We can.
My apologies. I moved my computer and I forgot to switch over to my other network, but I am back. All right. So it sounds like we approved the minutes while I was temporarily absent.
Yeah, one abstention.
Okay. We'll then move on to agenda item 5. We had 2 communications this evening. I think one of them we'll be talking about a little bit further later on in agenda item 8A. So we'll come back to that in a few minutes. But next we'll go on to agenda item 6A, which is our first public hearing, which is zoning amendment number 21010 from the Township Board to amend the Code of Ordinances to require the Township Board approval of special use permits for motor vehicle sales and service establishments and auto dealerships in the C2 and C3 commercial zoning districts. and we will go ahead and open the public hearing at 7:04 p.m. And then we'll turn things over to Principal Planner Menser.
Hello, everyone. Good to see you all virtually tonight. We got a lot of screens going here. Okay, so tonight's public hearing for this zoning amendment that is before you. It starts, at least our staff memo starts on page 10 of the packet. So the general idea, and I won't drag it out, is generally right now the township allows new car dealerships by special use permit in our C2 zoning district. We allow new and used car dealerships by right in the C3 district. So the proposed amendment would continue to allow the new car dealerships in C2 by special use permit, but the difference being instead of it, the process ending with the planning commission, it would go on to the township board. So the planning commission would be making a recommendation, and instead final decision would be going to the board. And then for C3, they would now, instead of being by right, they'd be by special use permit and also subject to township board approval. There were some other tweaks done to the language that I bullet point here. It was really just trying to make it more generic to refer to automobiles rather than just cars themselves. We did apply some standards for the dealerships and created a new section on a different section of the order, a different article of the ordinance that has some details on how they operations and standards. So that is the request that was initiated by the township board to make the change on the ordinance. For zoning amendments, this is the process of the planning commission is consideration and discussion tonight, having the public hearing to do so, and then at the next meeting make a recommendation, and then it would go on to the township board for consideration and final adoption. If the board adopts it, there's a two-step process for adoption. First step is introduction, and then final adoption that happens at two meetings back to back. So if you have any questions about the proposed amendment, my memo, and then there is the draft language. The new is in red, and you'll see some strikeouts, and then a very new, brand new section, that 86,660.
Thank you very much, Peter. So typically at this point, we would have the applicant speak in other formats for public hearings. And I do see that we have a member of the board here in our attendees area. I wanted to give him an opportunity to speak to us if he would like to. So Mr. Trustee Opsimer, if you're interested in joining us, please feel free. Otherwise, we'll go on to public comment after that. Looks like he is now a member here, so welcome.
Yes, thank you, Chair Hendrickson, and thank you, members of the Planning Commission. So I'll just speak very briefly. I think Principal Planner Menser did a good job overviewing the amendment. Originally, this was something that Supervisor Stika and I put before the board. So when we looked at the historical context on what had happened with the ordinance back in 2007, it was all surrounding a rezoning request for the Williams Auto Dealership on Jolly Road. That is adjacent to the Arby's, if everybody knows where that is. And at that time, they had the existing auto dealership was in C3. And they had requested to rezone some C2 adjacent to the east in order to expand the auto dealership. And at that time, the Planning Commission, well, actually the board, I forget the action that the Planning Commission took, but the board was not in favor of the rezoning and instead elected to amend the zoning ordinance to allow the Planning Commission to permit the dealership to expand into the C2. When Supervisor Stika and I looked at the historical context of this, that struck us as odd because it was basically a one-off zoning amendment or amendment to the zoning ordinance that created the prospect of auto dealerships spreading throughout C2, which is our most prominent zoning classification for commercial. C3 is predominantly contained within the mall and Central Park and the Meyer area. So that was a pretty big change from a zoning perspective and allowing auto dealerships to expand. And then the other primary factor that we looked at was the how intensive of development auto dealerships are. So they do not trigger the 25,000 square feet special use permit because they obviously have a small showroom. And then they typically have their maintenance facilities, perhaps a car wash, things of that nature on site. But when you look at the overall impervious area due to the surface parking that they put in, they are very similar to a traditional big box. So we thought it would be, rather than trying to determine if they should go into C2 or C3, we thought the most apt thing to do was just to provide better oversight, especially in light of the fact that the master plan really focuses on transforming most of our C3 into a more traditional town center. So the old zoning ordinance was pushing auto dealerships to the mall area. And in the current master plan that we adopted in 2017, we really imagine re-envisioning that area and making it more walkable, and auto dealerships run in direct contrast to that overall mission in the master plan. So that's kind of the background. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Trustee Opsimer. So at this point, we will open up for public comment. Once again, for those who are joining us in the attendees area, you can raise your hand. Or if you're at home and would like to join in the conversation, you can give us a call at 517-349-1232. And we'll, please remember to limit your comments to 3 minutes and provide us with your name and address at the top of the remarks. With that said, we'll go ahead and open the floor. Okay, I see Commissioner Cordell's hand. Give us just a moment. Stephen, is there anyone on the phones?
You have no phone call, sir.
Okay, then we'll go ahead and close public comment. And we'll move on to Planning Commission discussion. And I see Commissioner Cordell's hand.
Yes, thank you. So to make new or and/or used car sales special use permits, I understand that. What was the rationale of moving that decision from the Planning Commission to the board?
Commissioner Cordell, I'm guessing that was directed for me.
Sure.
I think just having greater oversight of very intensive development patterns, similar to the 25,000 square foot special use permit that also comes to the board.
Could it be something achieved the same way, but just like most special use permits that we deal with? That was an instance, what did you say, 2007?
The
Trustee?
last time, yeah, the last time auto dealerships within the zoning ordinance were amended was in 2007. At that time, C3 was a use by right. There was no ability to operate an auto dealership in C2 at all. And that zoning amendment stemmed from the Williams Auto Dealership rezoning application. It didn't come up organically on its own as a policy choice. It stemmed from one applicant trying to expand their auto dealership to a C2 parcel.
Sure, I understand that. I'm just wondering why why in 2021 there's a need for change, other than maybe to consider them as both special use permit.
One consideration was also the LaFontaine dealership and the way that they kind of abandoned the community after getting their special use permit and clear cutting that site at Powell Road and Grand River, and looking at just how vast C2 is along the corridor and how many undeveloped sites we have. That was one other discussion point of the board, is making sure that we have, you know, good oversight on strict and stringent oversight on such intensive development.
Sure, that we need oversight whether the planning commission is the last word on a special use permit or the board. And that, but thank you. I think that's it for me for now.
Saw Commissioner McConnell.
Yeah, I was just gonna weigh in that the logic of extending the extended oversight of buildings 25,000 square feet and over, and the sort of impervious surface of a dealership, car dealership, it makes sense to me that those two things are kind of extraordinary and would come under the same level of oversight.
Commissioner Bloomer, I see that you've included something in the chat. Would you mind vocalizing that so we can have it for the folks at home?
Yes. In reading the proposed new language in section 86-2, there are definitions proposed for auto dealership new and auto dealership used. I'm wondering if it's a typo because those two have identical word for word definitions.
Yeah,
My assumption is yes. We'll check that out compared to the draft language.
I
Part,
wanted to call that to your attention that it appeared to be an error.
one thing, the difference too is we had to have a definition for new because only new dealerships are allowed in C2, where in C3 you could have just a used car dealership by itself without any new cars. So we had to make a distinction between those two. And yes, they are very similar, the definitions.
Yeah, I think Commissioner Bloomer's point, if I can step in on his behalf here, was that they're so similar that they're exactly word for word identical. And I think in one case for the used, you should substitute used for new in the second line of that definition.
Yes, that's a mistake. So we'll take care of that, and we apologize.
Any other comments or questions? Commissioner Cordell.
Hi, if no one else has any further comments from the Planning Commission, I do have a question of training that trustees have. Do they have opportunities to get any land use training from the MSU Extension or the MAP seminars that many planning commissioners, including myself, have been able to participate in? I guess as if the planning board gets more authority to make land use decisions, the shift from the traditional, the planning commission to the board, I would just encourage them to take advantage of as many training sessions as possible to make sound planning decisions.
Yes, and I do know that each board member gets a stipend for seminars and other trainings that occur throughout the year. I know that Trustee Jackson and Treasurer DeShane have done quite a few. I don't know specifically on those two, but MML, MTA, the Planners Association, I know that various board members have all partaken in those trainings and seminars.
Okay, yeah, I would encourage that as much as possible, since there is a shift in the with this proposal, there'd be a shift in the decision making. Thank you.
Commissioner Primo.
I will go ahead and say that part of what you're proposing smells a little bit like you're not trusting the commission to do what they're chartered to do, and you think you can do it better. Dan, that's for you.
I appreciate the sentiment, Dave. I don't think that was the intent. I mean, Ron and I talked about a number of different approaches. We talked about does it make sense to eliminate C3 entirely, since many of the C3 parcels, at least in the future land use map, are mixed core? So an auto dealership runs completely counter to a mixed core model. Nobody wants to walk through, 12+ acre auto dealership to get to the next mix and use. But C2 just being so vast throughout the township, we felt that we've only had one auto dealership apply under that 2007 amendment. So that 2007 amendment has only had one applicant other than the one-off applicant back at that time. And that was the LaFontaine dealership. And the tree clearing did spark Ron and I to talk about this, and that's where we started talking about the amendment. So that amendment's only been put to use at one occasion, but when we look throughout, if you look at the zoning map, C2 is highly prevalent. And so having that change of allowing dealerships in C2, we felt it was prudent to have more oversight if we were going to allow it in C2. The Planning Commission and the board, when they structured the 2007 amendment, didn't necessarily think that through. I think the board at that time was also kind of kicking it to the Planning Commission, because they rejected the application to rezone that eastern parcel adjacent to the Williams Auto dealership. And so they didn't really want to see the special use permit come back to them. So I think it's also the historical context of it. But traditionally, when you look at, the mall area in Meyer and the big box core that is our C3, it was intensive commercial use. And so dealerships fit very nicely, and neither the Planning Commission nor the board had a role in it. The LaFontaine dealership was really the only dealership that the board and the Planning Commission, or the board or the Planning Commission, had any role in. So we were kind of looking at it more from essentially starting from scratch. We have 3 dealerships, and they were all built by use by right in the township.
Okay, thank you, Commissioner Trezise.
I'm not sure that this is any different than the one-off amendment that was made in 2007. It sounds like it's a reaction to LaFontaine, and I will acknowledge that that didn't turn out the way everybody expected, but I'm not sure how changing the level of authority to approve or deny up to the Board of Trustees would have changed that outcome in this situation. Maybe a better tack would be to define what the parameters are in a C2 to allow a dealership in more detail. And I could appreciate the Board of Trustees wanting control over this and final decision, because it is a significant impact on the surrounding area. But I'm not sure that this amendment changes the results that we've had in the past.
Okay, Commissioner Cordell, I saw your hand again.
Oh, yeah, and I put it down, but is the, I was sad to see the site left that, but is that not rather a plan? Is that not really not a planning issue, but it's more of a building issue, a building department issue?
That sounds like a question for Peter, perhaps.
Mark, do you want to answer, or do you want me to?
No, I can answer it. Once the special use permit is approved, then the next step is site plan approval. And once that has been approved and LaFontaine had site plan approval, then they can get their construction permits, their building permits to start work on the site. And they did have the approval to go ahead and start grading and doing that preliminary construction on the site. So that's where the clearing took place.
So it does sound like it's more of a building issue than it is a planning issue.
Right, because it's left up to staff through the process.
Okay, thank you.
Any other discussion? Yeah, I mean, from my perspective, I can certainly see the need for greater oversight, right? Allowing this as a use by right in any commercial zoning would be, I think, a mistake. I do agree that in this LaFontaine case, I don't know that ceding authority to anyone would have made a different circumstance in this case, because as was pointed out, they did have a special use permit. It was approved, and off it went, and here we are. But you know, I think more eyes on it are better. I also think that you know, we're at our best when everyone is working together on it. And I can certainly see some value in bringing the board into this process. And I think that, you know, having the 25,000 square foot size as justification for why that is a valid justification for it. I don't know if I'm completely on board with giving that authority away, but at the end of the day, if the board is asking for it, you know, I trust that they're still taking our recommendations into account when we make them on these special use permits. And we're very fortunate to have currently several former planning commission members on the board. And I agree with Commissioner Cordill that I'm sure that, you know, we all hope that as land use decisions are a major part of, you know, what we send to them, that everyone's taking advantage of the trainings available. So I think I'm going to be in support of this based on what I can see here. I'll be interested to think a little bit more on it as we move from this to our next meeting, and as the rest of the discussion shapes up. But I appreciate the intent of certainly the zoning restrictions, and I'm close to sold on the final decision maker as well. And yeah, I do see Trustee Opsmer, you're looking to weigh in as well.
Just one other thing to share. I mean, one thing that we did talk about was taking the C2 and just removing the C2. I mean, C2 was put into the ordinance on a one-off instance for one parcel adjacent to an existing C3 auto dealership. I think if you look at the C2 map, you're hard pressed to find many parcels where the community would be benefited by having an auto dealership. So that was also something where the board was saying, you know, when we look at C2, there's pretty extenuating circumstances to where we would even want an auto dealership at this point. So hence the strict oversight. And I think the Planning Commission would probably concur there, but we were just looking at it from what gives us the greatest flexibility. The other, you know, where I think, you know, when you look at the zoning map, where auto dealerships would really fit would be adjacent to the existing auto dealerships in that high intensity commercial corridor wrapped by, you know, Marsh Road, Central Park, and Grand River, so to speak. So we were just looking for flexibility in how we drafted it. I think there's the case even to take C2 out of it and just revert it back to what it was prior to the 2007 one-off. I mean, we're open to ideas. We weren't looking to be reactive, but one consideration also is that LaFontaine will have to reapply and get a new special use permit. Their special use permit will expire, and the community will have an opportunity to rectify that situation and get trees planted. And every board and commission is somewhat limited as to how far they can move the football down the field. We're typically never, you know, fully successful in getting the applicant to acquiesce everything that the community wants. So having two bodies review that LaFontaine special use permit application when it comes in somewhere post-COVID, because COVID is really probably what's held them up. Auto dealer or auto sales really took a sharp hit during COVID. So when they reapply, having the Planning Commission and the board work to get some of that site replanted and to work with them on some, you know, pervious to impervious that benefits the community, especially adjacent to Powell Road there, would be good. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Bloomer and then Commissioner Snyder. Mark, you're muted.
Forgive me, because again, I'm new here, but doesn't the township board have override authority over our decisions anyway? What does this actually change? If we make a decision to approve a special use permit and they review it and find that that was an error, it wasn't consistent with community needs, doesn't the board already have the authority to override that?
I do not believe so. Mark and Peter, can you correct me if I'm wrong, but we don't have any oversight on special use permit applications for dealerships in C2.
Correct. Currently in C2, that would be a planning commission decision. There's very few special use permits that actually go up to the board. One was mentioned, buildings over 25,000 square feet are subject to board approval. Generally, special use permits stay at the planning commission, and only if your decision is appealed by maybe an applicant or somebody that felt aggrieved by the decision of the planning commission would it go to the township board for a decision.
Yeah, it's tough because we've had in the last few months, the public hearings and decisions we've been making have been largely some of these MUPUDs and some of the larger items that do go in front of the board. So it's possible that we just haven't had a straight SUP in quite a while. We'd probably have to be going back to early fall, late summer for one of those, if memory serves. I see Commissioner Snyder next.
Thank you. I just wanted to acknowledge I appreciated hearing Trustee Opsheimer's comments about the C2 special use permit, the amendment, because that's what I found myself wondering when this whole topic came up. If, back in 2007, we made this special amendment for, one particular business, and that seems to be where the problem stems from. And it seems as though the C2 area isn't going to be a place where we want to have car dealerships. Why not just go back and change the ordinance so that it's no longer permitted by special use permit? That was just what I was thinking as this discussion was evolving. So I just appreciated your comments and letting us know that that was something that the board had also considered, just for what it's worth.
Okay, anyone else? Okay, I don't see any more hands. Last chance. All right, so since there seems to be a bit of discrepancy or division here on the ordinance as a whole, the ordinance amendment as a whole, it might be prudent to, as we're doing our straw poll here, to split it into two sections. One relating to folks, whether or not they support the zoning changes, and one for the approval process, just so I've got a clear vision and staff has a clear vision as to how we're feeling as a group. So let's go ahead, and I should point out for the members of the public who are watching at home, this is a straw poll. It doesn't necessarily mean this is our final decision, but this is just an indication to give Peter and Mark an opportunity to craft a resolution for next time, or a motion, I suppose, for next time. So let's go ahead and we'll do the zoning changes first. And we'll go to Commissioner McConnell.
As I said earlier, I feel like the restriction on size of a building and size of impervious area are commensurate. So on that substantive basis, I support the idea.
Okay, and Commissioner Shrewsbury was asking for the two points that we're talking about. The first one is doing special use permits for C2, and the second part is the 2-hop approval process. So that was a yes on the zoning from Commissioner McConnell. Commissioner Primo.
Yes.
Commissioner Cordill.
Just wanted to verify that there would be that both instances C2 and C3 would be special use permits, and it's taking away that right in the C3.
Yes, thank you,
Okay.
yes.
And then the second one we'll be voting on is that who's deciding, or can you clarify that?
So the change to make the board the final decision maker.
I see. Okay, well, I think it's appropriate to make them special use permits.
Okay, Commissioner Shrewsbury.
I agree on the zoning piece.
Okay, Commissioner Richards.
I agree.
Commissioner Bloomer.
I agree.
Commissioner Snyder.
I guess I'll go with I agree.
Okay. Commissioner Trezise.
I agree.
And the chair votes yes. Okay, so it looks like we're all in favor of the zoning change. So then we'll look at approval process. We'll go to Commissioner McConnell.
The fundamental notion of improved oversight, I think, is appropriate. I can see reasonable opposition to increased red tape. So I'm marginally in favor of increased oversight.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Primo.
I am not in favor.
Okay, Commissioner Cordell.
I was concerned with how the issue was framed, how it was presented. Honestly, I felt like that was based on our decision making, which I felt that was out of our control at that point of whether trees are cut down or not or replaced. But theoretically, the board could decide public hearing at the planning commission meeting, and if they so choose to have one at the board level, so be it.
Okay, sounds like a leaning yes to me, if I don't want to put words in your mouth. Commissioner Shrewsbury.
I'm also not 100% here, but leaning towards yes. Although, Peter, perhaps you can clarify. It's my understanding you've said before that the body that decides has to have a public hearing, so it would extend the process requiring 2 public hearings if we had one and then went
No,
to the board.
so yeah, my comments on that were it's strictly related to the MUPUD ordinance.
Got it. Okay. All right.
So in this case, the planning commission could have the public hearing. The board would not have to hold a public hearing, but could make final decision.
Okay, thank you for clarifying that. I'm still, I'm not as new as I used to be, but I'm still not 100% on those. So I'm leaning towards, these are significant enough developments and have such an impact that I think it is at some level helpful to have the board have some ownership in that, as or the board of trustees have ownership in it. So, but I'm I guess curious to hear those who are opposed. I'd like to think about it, and if there are arguments on that side, I'm still not 100%. Thank
Commissioner Richards.
I'm in a similar position as Commissioner Shrewsbury, leaning on the fence, but leaning slightly towards yes.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Bloomer.
No, I believe at this stage, at least, I'm opposed to that change.
Okay, Commissioner Snyder.
I'd have to say I'm on the fence as well. If I had to say which way I'm leaning, I'd say more opposed.
Okay, Commissioner Trezise.
I am probably leaning more opposed, especially with regard to the C3, since that is a right at this point to take it to by special use and going to the Board of Trustees, I think is overkill. I can see a better argument for that transfer in the C2 area.
Okay. And I generally support this for the reasons I mentioned previously. So it looks like that is, and these are soft numbers, it sounds like, but it looks like we've got 5 in favor and 4 opposed by my tally. So I think perhaps we'll talk about this again in the next meeting as we move forward here. And hopefully that will illuminate us a little bit more. Is there any information that staff or the board could provide to us that might aid in that discussion next week or 2 weeks from now? And before I get to that, I'll go to Commissioner Cordell, who was waiting patiently, and then I see Trustee Opsmer raising his hand as well.
Would you like me to go ahead?
Please,
I'm sorry.
please, yes, yeah.
Okay, this proposal is presented by the board, and it will go to the board with a recommendation from the Planning Commission or without a recommendation. I'm just trying to get the process and make sure I understand the process. The board will make the final decision whether the board has the final say on such facilities. Is that correct?
They will go to the board, yes, after us.
Okay, that's what I thought. Thank you.
Trustee Opsmer?
Yeah, one thing that might be helpful, and I don't have the full list in front of me, is to have staff compile a list of all of the special use permits. The most common one is drive-through windows. And then I believe there's floodplain work and assisted living facilities. So I think when you look at the totality of the list of special use permits, there is a pretty discernible gap in terms of the scope and impact of development between those others and auto dealerships. So every drive-through window that you see in that C3 area, Chick-fil-A, the Meijer Pharmacy, Taco Bell, Burger King, which is now closed, but those were all special use permits. But an auto dealership had no special use permit. So I would, say that our ordinance was was not very measured when you look at these different types of uses. So having staff compile that list of special use permits and balancing those other special use permits against a dealership, which usually develops 12 plus acres, is something to look at. Thank you.
Thank you.
I can put that list together for your next meeting.
Thank you, Peter. Anyone else before we move on? All right, very good. Thank you very much, everyone. And we'll close the public hearing at 7:41 p.m. So then we will move on our agenda to item 8A, which is the 1999 Saginaw Highway and within other business. And for those following along in the packet, this is relating to the letter that we received from James Filipich of the Meridian Company. And this is just an item for discussion, I think, to help Peter and others respond to Mr. Filipich. And he might be here with us. I don't know if he's in the attendees area, but
I thought I saw him pop in earlier, but he either went away and never came back. I'm not sure.
Okay.
But we'll make sure he has access to this meeting. He knew it was coming, and then we'll make sure he has access to it afterwards.
All right, thank you. So Peter, why don't you give us a little primer here?
Okay, well, thanks, Mr. Chair. Hope you've all had a chance to take a look at the letter that was in your packets, the letter from Mr. Filipich. And if not, I'll break it down for you right now. So there were two properties. Actually, I'm going to, an unprecedented move, share my screen. Unprecedented for me, at least.
It's been a while.
And I'm working on so I built a computer over Christmas. And so now, can you see my screen?
I see lots of birds.
Okay, good. Yes, good deal. So anyways, I built a computer over Christmas, so now I have a new computer to use for this kind of stuff. So hopefully you can all see a map, an overview map. What I'm showing here is the area along Saginaw Highway, west of Marsh Road, north of Towner, and then southeast of Saginaw Highway. So our little cutout of this. In 2018, the parcel ringed in the dotted red lines here. So the green is 1999 Saginaw Highway, M78 business route, whatever you call it, whenever you moved here, is shown in green here. And then right next to it is another small little piece under an acre. All of this was rezoned under two separate applications back in 2018 from industrial to commercial, C2 commercial. And they're zoned that way now. So you'll see I did some labeling along the way. Meridian Company is where some of you may know it as Meridian Plumbing. They changed their name several years ago to be broader, but it's Meridian Company is on this parcel. They also own the parcel in green, and then the parcel in white that says events above it is owned by another party. So long story short, Meridian Company has been looking into options for their future of their business, where they want to be long term, which does include this area in the township. So that's not a concern. But the area in green, they were considering kind of what to do. One option is they may build on the green here. But to do that, Meridian Company is zoned industrial, and a big part of that is to contractors establishment. And that is a use that's not allowed in C2, but is allowed in industrial. So in considering maybe building something on this green property, the zoning has come into play, because if they wanted to do what they do on their current property on the new one, they wouldn't be able to. So the thought on their end is, do we, in what you'll see in that letter, really is a question that posing to the Planning Commission is, are we better off pursuing a rezoning of this green back to industrial? Or would we be better off requesting the township to consider an ordinance change to allow contractor establishment back in C2? So we have talked, and I do not speak for the township board at all, but initially it doesn't seem like that might be a consideration, and that's certainly something I'd like to hear the Planning Commission discuss tonight, is the potential for having contractors establishments. And I think Meridian Company is a great example, and you can probably think of many more that would be, well, all the ones I showed in the previous map, being allowed in C2. And as discussed in the last agenda item, C2 is prevalent in this kind of core of our community. So on the screen now is the zoning map for this area. You can see that whole block is C2, where those two properties are. Those are the properties that were rezoned. And then the rest of this area here, other than the property that fronts on Marsh, is all zoned I industrial. Our future land use map shows that whole blue area, again, with this exception of this residential piece that fronts on Marsh, as this business technology. And if you take a look at the master plan, business technology, it's for employment centers for the township and region. These areas should serve the community's need for research facilities, light industrial opportunities, or corporate campuses. And it talks about continuing research, technology facilities, corporate headquarters, light industrial operations, non-retail business uses. So it's not intended to directly provide goods and services to the community. And I think for the most part, that's what you've seen develop. I guess we didn't, time frame, it didn't develop based on the future land use map. That's what's been there for years. So, but I think that fits this area rather well. So the question before you, and Planning Commission doesn't consider a lot of requests like this. You aren't often given the task of helping someone decide kind of a path forward, but that's what's being requested tonight. I don't necessarily know how this is if this is resulting in a vote, or if it's just something you want to chat about. Just based on preliminary conversations with staff and with some folks in the administration, doesn't sound like a zoning amendment is preferred. May just want to ask this applicant to rezone, and that process back through the Planning Commission, back through the Township Board, or any alternative solution that you can identify that may help this property owner.
Okay. Commissioner Primo.
Two thoughts. I personally would favor just rezoning, but I also would like the applicant, or the person asking us to give an opinion, to know that this is just an opinion, and that we may decide at a later date to do something different. This is not approval, it's an opinion. I just want to make that clear. But my opinion is that I think just rezoning to industrial makes the most sense.
Thank you. And yes, I had that written down, so I appreciate your giving the disclaimer for me. Okay, I see Commissioner Bloomer, then Richards, then Cordell.
Thank you. Just looking at the current use map that Mr. Menzer put up, it appears to me that what the petitioner is requesting here is consistent with much of what's around him on that property, along that strip. I don't see that it's going to significantly change the existing use in that area. And if this came in the form of a petition to rezone to allow him to make that change, I think I would probably vote to approve that change.
Sure. Commissioner Richards?
Yeah, I would, I agree with Commissioner Primo that actually as the C2 sits, it's surrounded by industrial. So I mean, in itself, it, arguably is kind of a spot zone as it sits. So I think for consistency purposes, rezoning back to industrial makes sense.
Okay, Commissioner Cordell?
Oh, can you please repeat what the future land use is for this area?
It's all business technology.
So I'm trying to figure out how industrial type uses or contractor.
Yeah, so the business technology, it talks about in the master plan, employment centers, research facilities, light industrial opportunities, or corporate campuses,
Okay.
like manufacturing, operations, non-retail.
So considering it as a light industrial use, I don't know if they're like fabricating. I mean, they're an HVAC. I don't know if they're
I can
company
tell
as
you
well.
some details on the use if that would help, and I apologize if I glossed over that. If you're familiar with, I mean, they're a full services HVAC business.
Sure.
And I guess we shouldn't, in this case, we are dealing specifically with their property, but just generally, the contractors' establishments are going to have some potentially part of the building may use for sales floor. And you've been in places like that. They typically would have maybe a dream kitchen set up where you could pick the tile out and that kind of thing. But 75-80% of their business is going to be on-site work. So they may have their fleet of vehicles there, their equipment, their parts. So you could probably pop into a store like that and get a part, but typically you wouldn't, I think is the general idea. They're more of a service setup.
But when you say on-site, that means on the side of the customer.
Yeah, so
Correct,
they're
yeah.
not relying on me to drive in and buy a faucet. They're more interested in selling me
Right,
a new kitchen or HVAC or whatever.
right. Okay, thank you. Just looking for clarification.
Okay, Commissioner Trezise, then Commissioner McConnell. Peter, you're muted. That's
Thank
going to
you.
get all of us tonight.
Yeah, you might as well be uniform in our consistency here. I don't see a reason to amend the C2 zoning to provide for this, given the C2 is so widespread through the district, could have unintended consequences similar to what we were looking at a few minutes ago with regard to auto dealerships in the C2. It seems to be a one-off type amendment, which could have ramifications down the road that may or may not be acceptable to the township. So I prefer the rezoning back to industrial.
And Commissioner McConnell, thank you.
Yeah, thanks. I was going to make sort of a philosophical point that I don't fully grasp what business technology means. But my experience with the Meridian company is that doing a lot of technology. And in this day and age, they're supporting the business because they service my home, and my home is where my business happens. So I'm a little foggy on those distinctions and support what can help a local successful business to thrive.
Anybody else? Yeah, generally I support the rezoning as an option as opposed to making a change to the ordinance. I think that it's a far more targeted solution, especially seeing it on the surrounding zoning map. That it seems appropriate on spec based on the surrounding uses. Can't say how I would vote were this to come before us as a proposal, as Commissioner Primo mentioned, but generally, I think that's probably a better course of action to take. And so if we could, sounds like we've got a relative consensus around that. And I think perhaps if Peter, you want to let them know that, oh, I'm sorry, Commissioner Shrewsbury, before I get to my sweeping broad point, let's hear what you have to say.
It just occurred to me, Peter, as you were showing us the map, there was a little corner of that site that was not their business. Would they be impacted by a rezoning, and would that be a negative impact on an existing business?
You're right. That's 0.42 acre site. That would remain commercial. I would want to look. I can bring that back to you, but initially they could operate as is. I mean, if they wanted to expand, there might be setback issues.
Okay. I just want to make sure we don't. I didn't state this, but I tend to agree with the rezoning as most other people have. But I just want to make sure we're not helping one if we were to go that direction, if that didn't have a negative impact on someone else.
Yeah, I agree with that.
I will be sure to note that if the rezoning application comes through.
Thank you very much. Any other discussion on this topic? Going once, going twice. All right, then we'll go ahead and move on to agenda item 8B, which is the mixed use plan unit development ordinance review.
Could I summarize real quick on the last item?
Oh, sure, yeah.
Sorry. I just wanted to say I will reach out to, unless someone has a different idea, I'll reach out to the gentleman that sent the letter and reference him to this video if he wants to see it himself, but otherwise we'll provide a summary. And hopefully that will give him direction. I believe he wrote the same letter to our supervisor,
okay. So
they may have a similar conversation. But thanks for your thoughts on it.
Thank you. All right, we'll go ahead and turn things now to our MUPUD subcommittee and how that has all been going. And I guess as we do often, we'll let Peter go ahead and get us kicked off.
I'm happy to share the floor. Was someone else from the committee like to speak tonight on what we talked about at the subcommittee meeting?
If you want to go ahead, we could always chime in, but you always do a nice presentation. So
well, thank you.
Why don't you kick us off?
I wasn't going to say a lot. The subcommittee, we weren't able to get our schedules together until last week. So we did meet I think it was last Tuesday. Man, weeks just fly by. It was last Tuesday already. And talked about, really the focus was on amenities. We talked a little bit about density. So I'm going to incorporate those comments into the next draft, and we'll have that for you at least to consider the March 8 meeting. There'll be 2 public hearings that evening as well, but at least have a new draft for further consideration.
And remind me, it was our intention and our goals to have this done more or less by the end of Q1 and moved on, right? So is it possible, do we think we can get that together for a public hearing on the following meeting after the 8th?
The way the calendar falls, we would have to, because of notification, I'd rather have the planning commission sign off on the draft before setting a public hearing, because I'd have to notify the public hearing before that. So there might be a gap of 1 meeting in between there, but yes.
Okay.
If you guys are ready with the language.
I mean, I don't speak for everyone, but I will say that it seemed as though we had circled around a relatively good consensus at the last time we all came together on it. And so I'm sure that there's a lot of good work that's being done on the subcommittee too to implement those changes. But I mean, I've got to see it first, you're right. Any other questions or comments on the MUPD ordinance from either the subcommittee members or anyone else? All right, seeing none, we'll go ahead and move on then to agenda item 9A, the Township Board update. So Planner Menser.
Hello. Okay, so Planning Commission last met on the 8th. Since that time, the Township Board held a study session on Tuesday, February 16, and it was about recreational marijuana. So for those of you that have been on the Planning Commission for the last couple of years, we went through the process, a long process of adopting considering and adopting a medical marijuana ordinance. So what's happened since then? We have some applicants for medical marijuana. There were a lot of conversations about from the potential operators about wanting to set up, have the township reconsider recreational. So the township originally opted out, and now they're they're at least considering opting in and doing a recreational marijuana ordinance. A lot of moving parts to that, exactly how it would happen. We just don't know. That conversation's happening, but that was, if you get a chance, check out that meeting. You'll see there was a lot of discussion about the board considering that. So I don't have any details to share right now. It's not the end of the conversation. They'll have it on at a future meeting. In fact, I think they're gonna have it for their meeting on March 2. Mark, is that correct? You remember? So if and when they adopt an ordinance, it'll probably be, I say probably because we really just don't know. I mean, if there's attorneys are considering things and just don't know the exact direction that will happen, but very likely it would come to the planning commission because there is a zoning element to it. Right now, the medical uses are allowed by special use permit that go through the planning commission and the township board. And in addition to the special use permit, they have to get a license from our department, which is really, there's an application process, and there's really just a lot of confirmation of different elements of having a marijuana operation. So more, stay tuned, more to come.
Hey, Peter, before we move on from that, just one thought I was having as I watched that last week. It might be prudent, since I know last time, as we were considering the medical component of this, we ran into 4 or 5 situations where we had questions that it seemed as though the board could answer that might have been helpful. It might be prudent if the rest of the commission is interested to hold a joint work session down the road as we approach consideration of this, if that's where this is going, so that we have an opportunity to hear from them what their intent is on some of the various questions that we might have. Not immediately, but whenever this makes it out of their purview and back into ours, I think it might be helpful.
Okay, I can share that.
Okay. Any other questions for Peter on the township board update?
2 more meetings to go. I'll be fast. February 20, the board met. They had a study session. Actually, they had a board retreat this last Saturday, and talked about strengthening their governance team. And then the board meeting does happen again tomorrow night. On the agenda, there really aren't any planning related items. So, but some of these things will come in. The zoning amendment that we talked about tonight, and then these special use permits that are going to be coming at the next meeting, those will all go back through the board as well. So, all right, thank you.
I'm sorry, did you say governance team?
They had a study or a board retreat called Continuing and Strengthening the Meridian Governance Team. And it was coordinated by or facilitated by a former member, I believe, of the MTA, or maybe the president of the MTA.
Interesting. All right. Sounds like a hoot.
Sorry, excuse me, what's the MTA?
Michigan Townships Association.
Oh, yeah.
All right, then we'll go on to liaison reports. Does anyone have any reporting from meetings that they've attended? Been a light couple of weeks for meetings, it looks like. All right, going once, going twice. Thank you very much. Okay, we'll go on to agenda item 10. New applications. We have 2 site plans received. We have none. Site plans approved. We have none. So which brings us to our final opportunity for public remarks. Once again, if you're in our Zoom meeting, go ahead and raise your hand if you'd like to speak. Or if you are at home, you can give us a phone call at 517-349-1232. Remember to limit your comments to 3 minutes and give us your name and address at the beginning of your remarks. We'll give everyone a moment to give us a call or raise your hand. Stephen, anyone on the phones?
You have no one on the phone, sir.
All right. Then in that case, we'll move on to agenda item 12, which is adjournment, and we'll go ahead and entertain a motion to adjourn. From Commissioner Richards, do we have a second? Seconded by Commissioner Bloomer. All those in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? And the Meridian Township Planning Commission stands adjourned at 8:04 p.m.
Can I make a motion that the next time we meet at Commissioner Primo's tropical beach that he had?
I know, I got distracted there for a minute. It looked so idyllic. Is that where you? Is that where you?
Wishful thinking.
Is that where you've biked to, Dave? Is that where you're at now on your bike trip across the country?
It's where I'd be if it weren't for the blankety pandemic.
All right. Thank you, everyone. Have a good couple of weeks, and we'll see you in a little while.
Yep.
Night.
Bye.